Hello to all our followers here on my channel. My husband had just been promoted to director, but my mother-in-law fasted for 3 days to force him to divorce me. I smiled bitterly and immediately signed the divorce papers. The next day, he received an official notice that he was suspended. My mother-in-law collapsed. It all began on the day of a lavish party at my in-laws' house. Early on, guests began to arrive in a steady stream. The living room was filled with fresh flowers. Expensive wines were laid out on the table. The entire house echoed with laughter and cheerful conversation. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, was wearing an elegant maroon gown made of silk charmeuse. She moved back and forth, attending to the guests, proudly announcing, "My son is a director now. After so many years of hard work, this is the day." I stood in the kitchen, watching them, feeling happy and relieved. Because that very morning, I had also just signed my company's biggest contract for product distribution with my husband's own company. 30% of their supply for this quarter would come from my natural cosmetics factory, Pure Bloom Organics. I thought to myself, I'm not just a director's wife, but also a partner quietly supporting him behind the scenes of his success. Most of the guests were leaving, and only a few close relatives remained. As I was clearing the table, Eleanor suddenly stood in the middle of the living room, her face serious. Her voice dropped. "I fasted for 3 days to pray for Mark's promotion," she said. "God did not fail me. But now, I must say this. My son is now a director, and he needs a wife who is suitable for his status." The entire room fell silent. I thought I had misheard. The 3-day fast wasn't out of joy, but in preparation for this announcement. I looked at her. I wasn't just a simple housewife dependent on her husband. I was the founder of Pure Bloom Organics, with agents in over a dozen states. I had my own factory, employees, and all the necessary licenses. I had spent countless nights studying product formulations, paid for defective goods out of my own pocket, and personally traveled to each state to maintain the trust of our agents. I looked at my husband, hoping he would say something, but Mark remained silent, holding his wine glass, avoiding my gaze. Eleanor's voice was firm. "An online business will always be just a small-time gig. A director should be with the daughter of a corporation's owner. Look at yourself." I heard every word, and it felt like something was squeezing my heart. She continued without hesitation. "Isabella, the daughter of the executive vice president of our partner corporation, has promised to add funding to our branch. She is the one who is suitable." Isabella. I had been hearing that name frequently lately. The sudden meetings, the late-night calls. I wasn't a fool. I had simply chosen to trust my husband. But now, it was all thrown in my face without a shred of decency. I calmly reminded them of my company's supply contract for the current quarter. 30% of the products are coming from my warehouse. Eleanor smirked, a smile as sharp as a knife. "Your paltry income, Clara, is nothing compared to a major connection. In business, you have to think long-term. You don't count every single box." I suddenly understood from the look in her eyes. Efficiency, timeliness, and profit meant nothing compared to a fancy title. She didn't see the nights I stayed up to inspect the merchandise. She didn't see the contracts I had worked hard to close to meet her son's company schedule. All she saw were 2 words: small time. Then, she took some papers from her bag and slapped them on the table. "Divorce papers. Mark has already signed. Sign them, so everything will be easier. Let's not make a scene." I looked at my husband. He couldn't meet my eyes. I asked, my voice soft but clear, "Are you sure about this?" Mark replied weakly, "I hope you can understand. In my position, I need a wife who can expand my network." I laughed, not out of joy, but because I realized how wrong I was to think that competence and integrity could replace a hollow sense of prestige. I picked up the pen, my hand steady. I signed the papers. Not a single tear. Not a single word of pleading. Eleanor was stunned for a few seconds, probably not expecting me to sign so quickly. I put the pen down and said slowly, "From this moment on, the contract between my factory and your company will be reassessed." The entire room went quiet. Mark looked up, shock evident in his eyes. But I added nothing more. I gathered my few personal belongings and walked out of the house I once called home. The next day, while I was at the factory inspecting a new shipment of products, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. People in our industry were buzzing. Mark's branch was suddenly placed under review due to a delay in a major project. The new supplier had failed to deliver on time, and costs were skyrocketing. By noon, the official announcement was made. Director Mark Thompson was suspended from his duties pending an investigation into his managerial accountability. Before I could even react, Eleanor called. I could barely recognize her voice. What happened? Why is his company under review? Did you do something? I answered calmly. I simply withdrew from the contract, as I am no longer part of the family. The line went silent, and then I heard what sounded like something crashing. They said Eleanor collapsed in the middle of the living room, in the very spot where it had been filled with congratulations the night before. On the day I signed the divorce papers, they thought I had lost. But it turned out to be just the beginning of a story they never expected. After that call and the news of Mark's suspension, I sat in my small factory office in silence for a long time. Outside, the sound of machines capping bottles and the calls of employees inspecting products continued as usual. But inside me, it felt like a cold wind was blowing. I didn't feel triumphant, nor did I feel completely relieved. What I felt most was a bitterness, because upon reflection, everything that happened today started in the days long past. In the days when I was just a simple woman with nothing, who believed that if you lived honorably and did business honestly, you would be respected. I remember, 6 years ago, I started in the small, cramped kitchen of our rented apartment. I had no large capital and no one supporting me. All I had was a meticulous nature and a simple belief: things you put on your face and body should be clean. Their origins should be clear, and it shouldn't be left to chance. I studied, read materials, asked those who came before me, and started the first batches of my product. The scent of fragrant oils, herbs, and beeswax filled the kitchen, and I sometimes thought I would live with that smell for the rest of my life. At first, I sold online, and the income was minimal, but what I held on to was trust. For every order, I noted the shipping time. If it was late, I would personally message the customer to apologize. One customer had an allergic reaction. Right or wrong, I refunded her money and taught her how to care for her skin. I understood that a long-term business doesn't depend on a single large profit, but on the customer's desire to return. I promised myself that when people's health was at stake, I couldn't be careless. I got my licenses and registered my brand. I named it Pure Bloom Organics because I wanted customers to feel safe and at ease when they held my product. I chose clean ingredients with clear origins and detailed the ingredients, expiration dates, and storage methods on the labels. Many said I was being overly dramatic, that for online selling, such detail wasn't necessary. But I didn't change. I knew that one mistake and the label of fraud would stick to me for life. During those times, Mark was just a sales manager. His salary wasn't large, and he often had client meetings and business trips. I managed a large part of our household expenses. I never held it against him because, to me, a married couple helps each other. Once, Mark held my hand and said, "You're so tired. When I make it big, I won't let you suffer like this anymore." I believed him. I believed him wholeheartedly. But it was also during those days that I started to notice my mother-in-law's stares. Eleanor was a person who valued status above all else. When we were newly married, she would often ask questions that seemed like simple inquiries, but were actually measurements. Are there any high-ranking people in your family? Where do your relatives work? I answered honestly. My family is simple. They make an honorable living. No one is powerful. After I answered, she would just nod and fall silent. Once, I came home from dropping off orders at the post office. She looked at the boxes and frowned. This online selling thing, it will go bankrupt one day. Women, instead of focusing on having children and taking care of their husbands, are busy with such trivial things. I was taken aback. I didn't know how to respond. I just forced a smile. "Yes, ma'am. It's just a side hustle to help with the expenses." She lifted her chin. "Help? A daughter-in-law in this family should have some class. When people hear that Eleanor Thompson's daughter-in-law sells things online, they'll laugh at us." I didn't answer. I chose to stay silent and work. I thought that time would speak for me. And it did. The only problem was, not everyone was willing to listen to its answer. A year later, I had regular customers, and some offered to become agents. I didn't rush. I trained them carefully, monitored their sales and delivery methods because I was afraid one careless person could ruin the entire brand. There were months when I had to drive my old sedan late at night just to deliver products on time. When I got home at night, I would type out customer service messages one by one until my fingers ached. But in return, my network of agents slowly grew and spread to different areas. I saved up, rented a small workspace, and hired 2 assistants. When the income became stable, I took the leap to invest in machinery and professionalize everything. 3 years passed. I had my own factory. It wasn't grand, but it was clean, met all the standards, and was enough for me to be proud of as the fruit of my labor. I had nearly 20 employees with clear roles and established processes. Every time I looked at the payroll at the end of the month, I felt a mix of pressure and pride because I knew I wasn't just supporting myself, but also the families of the people who trusted me. It was around that time that Mark's company faced a major problem. They needed a rapid supply of products for a big campaign. The large suppliers had quality, but a long process and a long wait. Mark came home, his face creased with worry. During dinner, he said, "If this gets delayed, I'm done for. If the project is delayed, my performance review will tank." I looked at him and said, "If you trust me, I can handle a portion of it. I won't promise with words. I'll promise by delivering on time." Mark stared at me, as if seeing me as a real businesswoman for the first time. He nodded. I didn't say anything else. I went straight to the factory, talked to the employees, arranged shifts, inspected products, and sped up production while maintaining quality. I delivered the products on time, not a single day's delay. The day the acceptance report was signed, Mark called me, his voice full of excitement. "Honey, you're more professional than the big suppliers." I didn't expect this. I heard that with a mix of joy and sorrow. I didn't need praise. I just needed recognition. But my mother-in-law was different. When she found out that Mark's company was sourcing products from my factory, she wasn't happy or even curious. She uttered only one sentence. "In the end, you've dragged the company into your little business." I was stunned. I slowly asked, "Ma'am, I have all the licenses and a proper contract. Why do you call it a little business?" She replied dismissively, "If it doesn't have a big name, you're still just a simple merchant. When people hear that my director's son is getting products from his online seller wife, they'll look down on him." I finally understood. To her, a title was more important than performance. Timeliness and stability were not enough to change her perspective. In her eyes, no matter how much I accomplished, I was still a daughter-in-law with her own business, not a daughter-in-law from a major corporation. And that thought was embedded in her mind like a nail, just waiting for the right moment to come out. That day, I told myself, "All right, I'll just be the best I can be. One day, Eleanor will understand." But it turned out that some people don't lack intelligence. They just lack a small but crucial thing: the ability to see life based on reality rather than labels. And that narrow-mindedness pushed my in-laws' entire family into a downfall that no one could prevent. After the successful delivery of my factory's products to Mark's company, I thought things would get easier. I assumed that once they saw tangible results, their obsession with labels would diminish. But life is strange. Sometimes the truth doesn't awaken people. It only exacerbates their greed. And Mark, from a man who once took pride in his wife, began to change ever since he was shortlisted for the position of branch director. The day Mark announced that his bosses were considering him, he didn't say anything negative. He was still calm, still decent. But I felt a shift. He started looking at his phone more often. He stood in front of the mirror more frequently, adjusting his hair and collar. Once, during dinner, he suddenly asked, "How do you think a director's wife should appear in public?" I looked up, thinking he was joking, but his eyes were serious. I answered him honestly. "However she wants, as long as she lives honorably and conducts her business with integrity." Mark fell silent and just nodded, a nod that felt cold. At the same time, my mother-in-law's ego seemed to inflate. She mentioned the word class more often. She used connections as a measure of success more frequently. At every dinner, the conversation revolved around where so-and-so's son worked, who so-and-so's daughter's father was, and would end with a familiar sentence: "In life, you need a sponsor. Without someone to push you, no matter how good you are, you're just an employee." I was tired of hearing it because, as a business owner, I knew very well that having a sponsor is good, but any push must still be based on competence and integrity. If you're pushed by false prestige, sooner or later, you will fall. She became more blunt than before. One day, I had just returned from a business trip. Before I could even sit down, she said, as if giving an order, "A director's daughter-in-law can't dress this simply. Go shopping tomorrow for some clothes with more presence." I smiled bitterly. "Yes, ma'am. But what I wear doesn't affect anyone." She slammed her silverware on the table. "Don't think that just because you have a factory, you can do whatever you want. Out there, people look at this family. At my son." At that moment, Mark was sitting next to me. I waited for him to speak up, but he just lowered his head and took some food as if he hadn't heard anything. And that's when the name Isabella emerged. At first, it was just in work conversations. Mark mentioned that the partner corporation had assigned someone for a development project. Isabella. I nodded, thinking she was just an employee, but the mentions of her name became more frequent. Mark's phone rang more often, and the messages multiplied. One evening, after dinner, he suddenly stood up. I'm heading out. A sudden meeting came up. I asked, a meeting at this hour? He replied, it's a big project. It can't be delayed. I didn't argue. I was used to the pace of work. I just told him to be careful. Not long after, I met Isabella for the first time at a company party for its partners. Isabella walked in wearing high heels, her hair perfectly styled, with a practiced smile and eyes that were discerning but remained friendly. People like her weren't malicious, but they were the type who, when you stood next to them, you felt you were being measured by a different standard. Mark introduced us. This is my wife, Clara. Isabella shook my hand and smiled. Mr. Thompson mentions you often. I simply replied, hello. I didn't like her way of speaking, a simple greeting tinged with an underlying message. My mother-in-law was at the party, glowing as if she wanted to own the entire room. She endlessly told people about her son who was about to become a director, then suddenly turned to Isabella and praised her. Now, this is what you call suitable. Smart, articulate, and works for a major corporation. I was drinking water and almost choked on what I heard. She said it right in front of me, as if I wasn't there. Isabella just smiled and quickly glanced at me. That glance wasn't hostile, but it was enough for me to understand that she knew what Eleanor wanted. From then on, Mark and Isabella's meetings became more frequent. Mark often mentioned that he needed a partner who was always updated on the progress. I tried to remain calm, but there were small signs that I could no longer deceive myself about. For example, Mark started criticizing things he used to praise. I wore a simple white blouse for a business transaction. He looked at me and said, you should dress more elegantly. I asked, for what? He replied, so people will respect you. I laughed, an unhappy laugh. Integrity earns respect. Mark's brow furrowed. Clara, you always talk about integrity, but integrity doesn't buy you opportunity. That sentence was the first thing that sent a chill down my spine because it wasn't just an opinion. It was a shift in his life's principles. From the principle of doing what's right, it became doing whatever it takes to get what you want. And the most dangerous thing is when a person starts to think that what they can get is more important than what is right. On another occasion, Eleanor took me to a gathering of her friends, a sort of event to show off their children. I didn't want to go, but she said it was so I would know my place. At the gathering, while they were chatting, Isabella suddenly arrived with some people from her corporation. Before I could understand why, Eleanor stood up, pulled Isabella to her side, and laughed loudly. Look, my friends, this girl is the truly suitable daughter-in-law for a director. That sentence was like a slap in the face. Isabella smiled faintly. Oh, you're too kind. But she didn't remove her hand, letting my mother-in-law hold it in a silent agreement. I sat there, my hands clenched under the table. I didn't make a scene, but inside, a clear crack had formed. When we got home, I asked Mark directly, did you know what your mother said earlier? Mark sighed and replied, it was nothing. Mom was just joking. I looked at him. A joke that felt like she was kicking me out of the house. Mark was silent for a few seconds and then uttered a sentence that stopped me in my tracks. Don't be so sensitive. I'm at a crucial stage right now. Don't cause me trouble. I asked the question I had been holding back all day. So crucial that you have to let your mother humiliate your wife in public? Mark looked at me, his eyes tired. I don't want to fight. You're a business owner too. You should understand that connections are more important than a few boxes of product. When I heard that, my heart sank. Because I am a business owner, I understood even better how dangerous that sentence was. Products can be delayed, they can be replaced. But when a man prioritizes a connection over the wife who went through hardships with him, what's truly being delayed isn't the project, but his own character. I didn't speak anymore. I just silently looked at my hands. The hands that had packed every order, signed every contract, and fulfilled every promise. And for the first time, I understood with clarity. Ambition was pulling Mark away from his own path. And I was being turned into something replaceable just because I didn't carry the label his mother wanted. After that conversation, I thought things would calm down, at least for a few days. But as the day of his promotion announcement approached, the air in the house grew heavier. Mark started leaving early and coming home very late. Every time he came back, he would take off his coat, sit on the sofa, and let out a deep sigh as if he had just come from a race. I pitied him, but that pity was slowly being overshadowed by the feeling that I was on the outside of my own husband's life. And while I was still getting used to that distance, my mother-in-law began to show her true colors without any pretense. Eleanor was almost certain that if Mark married Isabella, all doors would open for him. She said this as if it were a fact, anywhere she could, even in front of me. One day, while we were eating, she put down her bowl, looked at Mark, and said, "A man who wants to rise needs strong support behind him. That girl, Isabella, one word from her family, and the whole corporation will pour in funds, not like these businesses that are here today, gone tomorrow." I slowly put down my utensils and asked directly, "The here today, gone tomorrow, you're talking about, is that me?" She looked at me and smiled bitterly. "You already know the answer." I knew it all too well. For her, what she needed wasn't a capable daughter-in-law, but a daughter-in-law she could boast about. She craved the feeling of being called the in-law of the corporation wherever she went. She yearned for the whispers of admiration. Things like project progress, supplier quality, cash flow, and efficiency were matters for men. She didn't need to know about them. All she needed was the result, the title. The truth was, a large part of Mark's branch's success was due to the fast and flexible supply from my factory. I wasn't bragging about it. I worked under a clear contract, delivered on time, and worked overtime many times just to keep up with their schedule. Once, his company suddenly ran out of a product. If they had waited for the large supplier, the process would have been lengthy. I was the one who saved them again. But strangely, the more efficient I became, the more annoyed Eleanor got. She didn't see it as an advantage, but as a dependency, and she didn't want to be dependent. One afternoon, I received a call from a subsidiary of the partner corporation. They offered a small contract, but if it went well, it would become a long-term one. I was thrilled because it was a chance for Pure Bloom Organics to enter a major supply chain. I went home and told Mark. He listened silently. I thought he would support me, but before I could finish, Eleanor came out of the kitchen, her voice sharp. "Don't sign it." I was stunned. "Why not, ma'am?" She replied dismissively. "If you sign it, everything my son's company needs will go through you. If you have him by the neck, how can he become a director?" Hearing that felt like I was being choked. I am his wife. I signed contracts for work, for the brand, for a stable income, not to choke anyone. I try to stay calm. "Ma'am, the contract has clear terms. If I do it right, we both benefit." She slammed her hand on the table. "What benefit?" "The benefit is for you. But my son, people will say he's dependent on his wife." I looked at Mark as if asking for help for the last time. Mark hesitated for a second and said, "Think about it carefully first. Don't rush." I heard "don't rush" as "don't do it." The pain was there, not because Eleanor forbade me, but because Mark let her forbid me. From then on, I started noticing strange things. In our communications, Mark's company's purchasing department rarely contacted me directly anymore. Things that used to be a simple message now went through others. When I asked an acquaintance there, he hesitated to answer. "Sorry, we have orders to reevaluate our suppliers." I asked, "Who gave the order?" He didn't give a name, just sighed. "Someone wants us to switch to another supplier." I understood immediately. My gut feeling was right. A few days later, I accidentally saw Eleanor talking on the phone. Her voice was low but firm. She was standing in a corner of the garden, thinking no one could hear. As I was watering the plants, I heard her. "Yes, I'm serious. We want to change suppliers. It's his wife, you see. Her own business. Hard to control. It's cleaner if it's just you. Even if it's a bit more expensive, as long as people don't say he's dependent on his wife." I froze. She wasn't just talking. She was quietly meddling in the company's decisions for her own whims. That night, I pulled Mark into our room, closed the door, and said directly, "Do you know that your mother is interfering with the company's choice of suppliers?" Mark was surprised. "What?" I showed him the messages from my acquaintance in purchasing and told him what I had heard. Mark was silent for a moment and then looked away. "Mom is just worried about me." I smiled bitterly. "What kind of worry is it that puts you in danger?" "I don't want to be harsh, but I need to be clear. The supplier your mother is recommending has a record of delivery delays. I have a copy of their file. If you sign with them and the project gets delayed, you will be the one held accountable." Mark's brow furrowed in irritation. You always talk about risks. You don't understand my position. I stared at him. I'm not threatening you. I'm warning you, as a manager. You should know the difference. Mark stood up, paced, and then uttered a sentence that made my blood run cold. Mom is right. I can't let others think I'm dependent on my wife. I laughed, a truly bitter laugh. Who are others? I am your wife. I deliver on time. I maintain the progress for you. That is competence. Why has your wife's competence become something you should be ashamed of? Mark turned his back and didn't answer. And that silence was like a confirmation that, in his eyes, I had become a thorn. From then on, I understood more clearly. For Eleanor, profit or efficiency was secondary. What she worshipped was false prestige. And Mark had started to be drawn to that false prestige, to the point where he was willing to cast aside a real advantage just to maintain a good image. I sat alone in the room, thinking about the years I had worked hard to build my brand, thinking about every contract, every effort to save his company's progress. And for the first time, I felt fear. Not fear of losing money or a contract. I was afraid of something that was clearly coming. When people choose false prestige over reality, the price they pay will not be small. And I could feel that price would come at the very moment they were drunk on success. In the following days, I felt like I was standing before a storm I had long seen coming. I just didn't expect it to arrive so quickly. As the day of Mark's promotion announcement neared, he became more and more tense. He was barely home. Sometimes, when he did arrive, there were dark circles under his eyes. After putting down his briefcase, he suddenly asked, "If I become director, can you avoid showing up in front of clients for a while?" I looked at him, thinking I had misheard. I asked again, "Avoid what?" Mark hesitated. "I mean, don't talk too much about the factory's contract in front of them. It might be misinterpreted." I laughed. A dry laugh. Misinterpreted? Or are you ashamed of it? Mark fell silent. He didn't answer, but I could see he was afraid. Afraid of the gossip. Afraid of the label of being dependent on his wife. And when a man is more afraid of a label than a real danger, one little push is all it takes for him to step into a pit of his own making. That push was my mother-in-law. Eleanor wasn't just narrow-minded. She was also skilled at emotional manipulation. She chose the most sensitive moment to attack. 3 days before the promotion party. That morning, I woke up to a cold kitchen. Eleanor was sitting in the living room, pale, with dry lips. I asked, "What's wrong, ma'am?" She didn't answer me, but turned to Mark, her voice weak as if about to faint. "I'm fasting." Mark was shocked. "Why, Mom? Why aren't you eating?" Eleanor closed her eyes and sighed. "I can't swallow. I think about your future, now that you're going to be a director. But you're still carrying a wife who is not worthy." I froze. She spoke as if I were a shadow, clinging to her son's destiny. Mark turned to me, his eyes a mixture of confusion and irritation. I didn't respond. I just said, "Whatever you want, just say it directly." She opened her eyes, a gaze as cold as ice. "I want you to leave on your own. Don't wait for me to say more hurtful words." Mark shouted, "That's enough, Mom." She suddenly clutched her chest and took a deep breath. "What enough? I'm fasting for your own good. I'm not eating because I can't stand people laughing at you." I watched that scene and felt a chill. She was fasting not for faith or health, but to make herself a hostage, to bind her son with guilt. On the second day, she still didn't eat. She lay in her room, the door slightly ajar so Mark could see her. Occasionally, she would cough weakly, moan softly, and say, "I'm old. My only wish is for you to have a marriage you can be proud of." I heard those words and felt my stomach turn, not because I pitied her, but because I could see so clearly that she was acting. And the victim was Mark. On the third day, Eleanor made her strongest move. She invited some close relatives to be witnesses and add to the pressure. When I entered the living room, I heard her crying, "Look, my dear relatives. I raised him, cared for him, and now that he's becoming a director, his wife just has her own little business, no foundation, no connections, and she can't even give him a child." I froze. The phrase "can't even give him a child" was like a stab. I had a miscarriage once, a pain I never wanted to remember, but she used it as a weapon, saying it in front of our relatives as if it were my fault. A relative chimed in, "It's hard to maintain a family if the woman can't have children." Eleanor immediately seized the opportunity. "There, you hear that? My son needs to rise. He needs a suitable wife, like Isabella. Her family can help his career, unlike someone who just sells things." I couldn't take it anymore. I said clearly, every word distinct, "You can look down on me, but don't look down on my work. For this quarter's contract with Mark's company, 30% of the products are in my warehouse. I deliver on time, and I am responsible for the quality. That's not just selling things. Eleanor smirked, as if she had been waiting for me to say that just so she could refute it. There are plenty of sellers out there. If not you, then someone else. What my son needs are connections, not your boxes. Then she turned to Mark, her eyes red, her voice trembling. Choose. If you don't divorce her, I will die in front of you. I will fast until I die. I cannot bear the humiliation of having a daughter-in-law who is just a small-time merchant. I looked at Mark. He stood in the middle of the room, his face pale. I saw him hesitate, not out of anger at me, but out of fear of losing everything he held on to. The position, people's opinions, the promised investment from Isabella's family. He looked at me as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. In the end, he just sighed as if surrendering. Just sign it. Let's not make a bigger scene. I'm at a crucial stage. I heard that sentence, and suddenly, my heart became calm. Calm because I understood that I was no longer one of his options. I looked at Eleanor and the faces of the relatives who were expecting me to kneel or cry, but I did nothing of the sort. I went into the bedroom, took my documents, and came out. Mark placed the divorce papers on the table, his hand shaking slightly. Eleanor waited for me to break down. I picked up the pen and signed my name directly. No tears, no questions. I put the pen down and said softly but firmly, "From this moment on, the contract between my factory and your company will be reassessed." Mark was shocked. Eleanor turned pale. I didn't explain. I just stood up and looked Mark straight in the eye. "You've chosen what's suitable. You will be responsible for your choice." I walked out of that house amidst the whispers of the relatives. The pain in my heart wasn't anger, but a sense of profound insult. I had done everything through competence and integrity, but in the end, I was pushed away because of 2 words, not worthy. That night, Mark's company called me about the progress of the products. I didn't answer. I just sent a short message, temporarily suspended as per terms. I knew the new supplier couldn't catch up. I knew the major project wouldn't wait. And I also knew that when people change suppliers based on a whim, they're the ones closing their own path. The next day, the news of the internal review came like a thunderclap. The project was delayed. Costs had ballooned. There were errors in the signed reports. Mark was suspended pending investigation. The director's position, which he hadn't even warmed up to, was snatched from his hands. And Eleanor, who the night before had her head held high as she forced me to sign, was now just sitting there, dazed. The fancy connection with Isabella hadn't even begun, but the title of director's mother that she coveted had shattered like glass. I left my in-laws' house on a quiet night. No one saw me off, no one stopped me. The closing of the gate behind me felt like the end of a chapter in my life. I didn't linger, so they couldn't say I was being dramatic, and also so my heart wouldn't soften. I drove straight to the factory, my mind blank. The only sounds were the engine and the beat of my heart, as if trying to calm itself. But before I even arrived, my phone vibrated. An unknown number, but I knew it was from the purchasing department. I answered, my voice still polite. "Hello, this is Clara." The person on the other end spoke quickly, as if a second's delay would cause a major problem. "Ma'am, I'm from the purchasing department at Mr. Thompson's company. Can we confirm the delivery schedule for next week? The new supplier has already reported a 12-day delay." I wasn't surprised. I just felt cold. In business, 12 days isn't just a number. It's the death of a project. I asked slowly, "Have you reported this to management?" He hesitated before replying, "Yes, but there's nothing we can do. If you could help us." I cut him off, not shouting, but firmly. "The contract between us was temporarily suspended as of this morning. Please follow the proper procedures." The line went silent for a few seconds, followed by a sigh of despair. I hung up, not because I wanted revenge, but because I understood that if I sent the delivery, they would think I was still their free lifeboat, who, even after being cast away, would come back to save them. I would not do that anymore. When I arrived at the factory, I walked through the warehouse as usual. The boxes were neatly packed, labeled, and the lists were ready. I looked at them for a moment, and my chest tightened. With just one nod from me, these products could go straight to Mark's company and save them from a massive failure. But with just one nod, I would also be denying my own signature on the divorce papers and making myself a person who was kicked out but still had to bow down to serve. While I was thinking, my phone vibrated again. A message from an industry acquaintance. Just one line. Mark's branch is under review. Suspended due to a delay in a crucial project. After reading it, my grip on the phone tightened. The fall was faster than I had expected, and this was no longer a family matter. It was a matter of management, accountability, and a series of wrong decisions. That night, I kept working, arranging production schedules, signing documents, and reminding employees. I tried to keep busy so I wouldn't think of Mark's face when he made me sign. But it was midnight, when all the lights in the factory were off, and as I lay down, my phone rang incessantly. Mark's name was on the screen. I stared at it for a moment before answering. Before I could speak, his voice, on the verge of breaking, poured out, "Just listen to me. Can you come back and sign the contract again? Just one delivery. Just this batch. And I'll fix everything afterward." I heard that and laughed. A painful laugh. "I'll fix everything afterward" is a sentence spoken by people who have already pushed someone else to the brink. I didn't shout. I just asked, "Where are you?" Mark replied, "At the company. They called me in. There's a review. Someone is saying I favored an incompetent supplier. I have to explain. Do you understand? If this project is delayed, I'll lose everything." I was silent for a moment and then said, "You chose connections over competence. Now, you live with your choice." Mark stopped. "No, it's not like you think. I didn't want to change suppliers either. But Mom and the partner." I cut him off so he couldn't hide behind "but." "You signed it. You are responsible. When you signed, were you thinking about the schedule, or were you just thinking about a suitable director's wife?" All I heard on the other end was a rapid breath, and then a noise as if someone had snatched the phone. And Eleanor's shrill voice screamed, "Are you happy now? You deliberately ruined my son, didn't you? You signed the divorce, then immediately cut the contract. You wanted to fail?" I heard her voice, and suddenly, my heart became calm. I said clearly, "I am not ruining anyone. I simply withdrew from the contract when you kicked me out of this family. You used a 3-day fast to force me to sign. Did you think about the consequences?" She yelled, "What consequences? It's because you're selfish." I laughed softly. "No. Selfishness is ignoring schedules, ignoring risks, and chasing after false prestige. You thought changing a supplier was like changing a name on a piece of paper. But in business, one wrong move, and the entire chain breaks." She was quiet for a moment, and then her voice dropped, trembling. "How much do you want? Just name your price. Just don't make him suffer." I heard that sentence, and my heart ached. They still saw me as a simple merchant for whom everything was about money. I said firmly, "I am not asking for anything, and I will not accept anything. I am just doing what is right according to the contract, and I am also doing what is right according to the divorce papers you forced on me." I hung up, not out of anger, but because I knew if I continued, they would just throw different accusations at me to soften my heart. I lay there, eyes wide open in the dark. What I felt wasn't satisfaction. It was like watching a ship about to hit a rock that I had long warned about. But the captain chose to trust his connections over the map and compass. The next day, as Mark had said, the corporation sent a request for an explanation of the entire process of changing suppliers. I received a copy from an acquaintance in administration. I read every line and felt a chill. They weren't asking about family. They were asking about process, approval, risk assessment, and why warnings were ignored. With those questions, just one wrong answer, and the position could not be saved. By noon, a business news website published an article. A branch with a newly appointed director is facing severe delays. Suspicions of favoritism towards an incompetent supplier. Just one line, but it was enough to be the talk of the entire industry. I looked at my phone screen and sighed. Mark was starting to understand that what he called a crucial step wasn't just sitting in the director's chair, but taking responsibility for every decision. And as for me, I knew I had crossed a threshold. From now on, I would no longer be the person in the background, saving them from their mistakes. I would stand tall in my own life, using the competence and integrity I had worked hard to build over many years. After that news broke, the chatter about Mark Thompson became even more intense. I thought the company would handle it internally, but I underestimated Eleanor's stubbornness and the desire of others to find someone to blame. And the person they were pointing to was none other than me. That morning, while I was in a meeting at the factory, an employee ran in. Pale. "Ma'am?" Someone called me. They asked if it's true that we're holding back the products to raise the price. I froze. Who asked? He didn't know. Said he was from Mark's company. I put down my papers, my body turning cold. That kind of question wasn't to find out the truth, but to spread rumors. Before I could react, a series of calls from unknown numbers came in. One time, I answered. A woman's shrill voice greeted me. "What kind of business are you running? Putting a company at risk. Price gouging? Are you?" I immediately hung up. But the more I hung up, the clearer it became that someone was fabricating a story to make me the cause of the project's delay, to paint me as the villain after the divorce. By noon, an acquaintance from Mark's company sent a message. "Be careful. Eleanor is spreading a rumor that you're holding back products to raise the price, which is why Mark was suspended." I looked at the message. I wasn't angry anymore. I just laughed. She still didn't understand the root of the problem. She didn't want to accept that her son had made a mistake in choosing a supplier based on a whim. She needed someone to blame so she could still tell the story her way. Her son was brilliant, but things went wrong because of a bad daughter-in-law. And she wasn't just talking. She did something far worse. That afternoon, a former employee of mine who had moved back to her home state a few months ago called me, her voice trembling. I was called by Mr. Thompson's company. They asked me about the past. They said I should just tell the truth, that you used to threaten to cut off supply to raise prices. I sat up straight. "What did you say?" she said, her voice shaking. I told them it's not true, but they kept trying to guide my answers. They even said if I cooperated, they would help me find a job at the partner company. I understood then. This was no longer just gossip. It was a plan to frame me. I said clearly, "Don't sign any papers, and don't believe any promises. Everything must have official documentation. If they call you again, tell me immediately." "Yes, ma'am," she replied, as if a weight had been lifted. I hung up, my hands cold. I wasn't afraid of slander. I was afraid of a dirtier game, manipulating evidence. And I was right. That night, our head of legal showed me an email from Mark's company. The email had my name on it and was written rudely. "If you don't accept the new price, we will hold the products. You will be responsible for the delay." When I read it, I felt like I had been punched. I had never written anything like that. In all my years in business, even in disputes, I never resorted to cheap threats. I immediately told the head of legal, "Open up the entire system logs. I want to see every timestamp, IP address, and domain." He nodded. We stayed in the server room until midnight, examining every line of data. And there, the truth emerged. The email was sent from an address that was almost identical to mine, with just one letter different unnoticeable to the average person. The IP address was not from our system, and the time it was sent coincided with my meeting with the production team, for which we had CCTV footage as proof. Someone had deliberately fabricated evidence to make it look like I was price gouging, to justify Mark's change of suppliers, and to blame me for the delay. I looked at the logs and sighed. If I hadn't been careful, if I hadn't kept all the data, one fake email would have been enough to destroy the reputation I had spent years building. I didn't hesitate. The next day, I sent an official letter to the corporation, attaching all the system logs, transaction histories, delivery receipts, and confirmation from our email provider. I didn't use harsh words. I just wrote according to the law, requesting an investigation into the fabrication of information and defamation of a supplier. Before the ink was even dry, that afternoon, I was invited to an internal meeting. When I entered the conference room, I saw Mark. He looked like he hadn't slept in nights. He looked at me, a mix of exhaustion and annoyance. The first thing he said made me feel even more bitter. "Do you have to escalate this?" I stared at him. "You signed off on changing suppliers based on a mere promise of investment. Is that professional?" Mark bit his lip. I was pressured. I said slowly, "No one signed for you, and no one erased the warnings from your mind. You knew the risk, but you chose it anyway." The room grew tense. The auditor asked about the emails. I presented the system logs. Their own head of IT confirmed it. Mark looked at the documents, and I saw shock in his eyes. He probably just realized it then. They weren't just slandering him with words. They were willing to create fake evidence to make me the sacrifice. In a corner, Isabella was silent. Her confidence was gone. Her phone vibrated incessantly, but she didn't answer it. She avoided my gaze, as if she could already smell the danger and was planning her retreat. The meeting ended with a cold sentence from the auditor. "We will expand the investigation into the fabrication of this email and reevaluate the credentials of the new supplier." I walked out, my throat still dry. I knew I had saved myself, but I also knew that from this moment on, the game had changed. This was no longer just a mother-in-law's anger at her daughter-in-law. It was now a search for who to blame. And sure enough, by the end of the day, a piece of information spread that shocked everyone. The new supplier had previously been penalized for forging credentials in a past project. I read the message while I was at the factory, and my heart turned to ice. If that was true, and it was proven that Mark had ignored the warnings and signed anyway, he wouldn't just lose his position, he would lose his entire career. The next day, after the internal meeting, I received an invitation for an urgent corporate meeting. The topic: review of the project delay and the supplier change process. I read it and no longer felt afraid. I knew that finally everything would be brought to light. I prepared my documents, devoid of emotion, filled only with facts. The conference room was on the top floor. As I entered, I could feel the tension. All the top executives, the auditors, and representatives from the partner company were there. At the end of the table sat Mark, pale, the confidence from his party long gone. Isabella was a few seats away, impeccably dressed, but her hands were clenched tightly. I was introduced as the representative of the former supplier. I just nodded. The meeting had just begun when the doors suddenly opened. Eleanor walked in. I was surprised, but she must have pulled some strings. She looked composed, but in her eyes, I saw confusion, the confusion of a person who had started a small fire that had now become a raging inferno. She approached me and whispered, "Be careful what you say. Remember, we are still family. Don't let others laugh at us." I looked at her calmly. The family already signed the papers to kick me out. Eleanor was speechless. A staff member asked her to leave as it was an internal meeting. Inside the room, the auditor began to present. They showed a timeline. It was clear that the decision to change suppliers was signed before a complete risk assessment had been conducted. An executive looked at Mark. "Why did you change suppliers?" Mark replied, "To save costs." The auditors showed the numbers. The new supplier was indeed cheaper initially, but due to additional fees and penalties for the delay, it ended up being more expensive. "What kind of cost saving is that?" the executive asked. Mark couldn't answer. He looked at Isabella, but she avoided his gaze. When the fake email was mentioned, I stood up. "I would just like to add that the email in question has been proven to be a forgery. I have submitted the system logs." The auditor confirmed this. An executive asked me if I would resume the contract. "Can you guarantee the schedule?" I replied professionally. "According to our contract, I can fulfill my obligations. However, the contract was terminated by a unilateral decision from your company." I didn't mention the divorce. The discussion was about the contract. The tension grew thicker. The executive turned to Mark and asked, "So, did you change suppliers to save costs or to strengthen your connections?" Everyone in that room knew the answer. Suddenly, the representative from the partner company asked Isabella, "You were involved in recommending the new supplier. Can you explain why there is information that they were previously penalized for forging credentials?" Isabella was silent for a long time before answering. "I had no knowledge of that." That answer fell like a stone. If the person managing the project didn't know about such a risk, it meant one of two things: she was incompetent, or it was intentional. The auditor concluded with a cold recommendation. "We recommend the temporary removal of Mr. Mark Thompson from his position pending a more in-depth investigation." Mark looked up, his eyes red. The meeting ended in a heavy silence. As I was leaving, I saw Eleanor outside, pale, clinging to a chair. When she saw me, she said, her voice trembling, "This can't be happening. Mark is so brilliant." I looked at her, without anger, without pity. No matter how brilliant you are, if you make the wrong choice, you carry that mistake for life. I walked away, leaving behind a woman who had spent her entire life chasing false prestige, only to find, when it all crumbled, that she had nothing left to hold on to. After that meeting, a strange silence descended. There were no shouts, no more talk of who was suitable. I returned to the factory, but I knew it wasn't over with just a suspension. Mark was suspended. Someone said they saw him sitting alone in the parking lot, dazed, as if he couldn't believe the speed of his fall. Inside the company, rumors spread. Some said he was too hasty and stumbled. Others said someone pushed him. But what everyone feared most was the possibility that the partner corporation would withdraw its investment. And that very night, Mark sent me a message. "I need to talk to you." I didn't reply. I knew if I went to him, they would try to use me as a lifeboat again. The next day, a friend called. "Did you hear?" Isabella pulled out. She sent an email saying her family doesn't want to be involved in a scandal. A clean exit. I heard it and wasn't surprised. People like Isabella enter when there's a benefit and leave when there's a risk. She had no need for a falling man. I thought of Mark. It must have been like a bucket of ice water poured over him. He traded his marriage for a connection, but when trouble came, that connection quickly turned its back. Eleanor was surely devastated. Someone said she went to a wealthy relative for help but was told, "Don't involve me in your company's mess." She came home dazed, repeatedly saying, "Why did they leave us?" She couldn't understand that false prestige couldn't save anyone from audits and documents. Around noon, while I was inspecting products, someone came looking for me. When I went out, I saw Eleanor outside the gate. Her fancy clothes were gone. Her proud posture vanished. She wore a dark dress, her hair was a mess, and her eyes were red. Her voice was weak. "Can I talk to you?" I looked at her and invited her into the small receiving area. She sat down and suddenly said words she would never have uttered before. "Help, Mark." I asked calmly, "When you forced me to sign, did you ever think of this day?" She looked down and then began to cry. A genuine cry from someone who had run out of options. I just wanted him to rise. I never thought it would end up like this. My heart didn't soften. I just said, climbing a fragile ladder will surely result in a fall. You wanted him to climb quickly, but you placed his feet on unstable rungs. She sobbed. "I'll do anything. Just save him." I stared at her. "I don't need anything from you. All I need is for you to understand that not everything can be solved by pleading." She begged, "But you have the products. You can save the schedule." I didn't answer because my head of legal's phone suddenly rang. He came in, looking serious. The auditor sent an additional request. They've discovered forged signatures on the new supplier's credentials. My body went cold. Forging signatures was no longer a simple mistake. It was a crime. The IT department was immediately investigating to prove who signed without due diligence. They would be held accountable. I turned to Eleanor. She was still crying, but with a look of confusion. She didn't understand the gravity of signature forgery. She thought money and connections were the answer. But I knew that if this came out, Mark wouldn't just lose his position. He might be blacklisted from the entire industry. I stood up, resolute. "This is no longer a family matter. Please go home. If the documents are forged, even if I save the schedule, it won't erase the accountability. It will only make things more dangerous." Eleanor left, a broken woman. I remained, feeling like I was about to enter the darkest part of the story, because I knew the second storm would be the real one. And this time, it wouldn't just hit their prestige, but the law, their careers, and their futures. The thought crossed my mind. If I stayed silent, they might use my name as a shield again. For the sake of peace, I had to know the whole truth. The next day, an unknown number called. "Are you the owner of Pure Bloom Organics? I used to work for the new supplier. There's something I want to tell you." I asked for his identity. "I've already quit. I don't want to get involved, but I see they're blaming everything on you and Mr. Thompson. If you want to know why they were so brazen with the documents, meet me." We met at a small coffee shop. He said, "They've had warnings for a long time. Someone is protecting them." "Who?" I asked. "I can't say, but one thing is for sure. They couldn't have gotten into a project that big without a backer." He showed me an old text message on his phone. The order was clear. Just do it. The papers are approved. Don't worry about the signature. I took a picture of it. "Thank you," I said. He added, "Mr. Thompson isn't their first victim." After he left, only one thought was on my mind. If there was a backer, it was possible Mark was just a pawn. But a pawn still bears guilt for trusting blindly just because he wanted to believe. I immediately instructed my head of legal to request access to the documents as a directly affected party. The auditor sent over some parts. I read them, and many things were strange. The risk assessment was clearly rushed, and what struck me most was the signature on the initial proposal. It wasn't Mark's. It was his deputy's, a Mr. Leo Tinsay. I remembered Tinsay from parties, always sticking close to Mark, saying, "I'll take care of it, sir." Now, looking at Tinsay's signature, I understood that the wrong path had already been paved. They were just waiting for Mark to step on it. I also found an email warning from the technical department where the most crucial part was cut off. The conclusion stating a high risk was missing. I called an acquaintance in the technical department. Within an hour, he sent the original, longer email, including the missing part. I stared at it. If the warning was deleted before being forwarded, someone had deliberately cleared the way for Mark to sign without seeing the full danger. A question formed in my mind. What should I do? If I released this, Mark's punishment might be lightened, but Tensei would be exposed. And the story would no longer be a simple mistake, but an organized fraud. Mark called again. I answered. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm just asking, if you know something, tell the truth. I was wrong to be complacent, but I didn't forge documents. I didn't delete warnings. I was silent. I know you're angry, but if they blame everything on you, you won't be at peace either. Do you know why I never looked back? I replied. Because when you needed someone suitable, you let your mother humiliate me. Your silence was what stabbed me. Now, this isn't about feelings. I will do what is right. Whoever is at fault will be held accountable. If you are at fault, you will answer for it. I hung up. That afternoon, the corporation announced that the results of the investigation would be released within 48 hours. At that moment, Eleanor came to the factory again. This time, she knelt. I was wrong. Save him. I didn't help her up. If you want to save him with the truth, not by kneeling. I instructed my head of legal to prepare all the evidence. I looked at Eleanor. Please, go home. Stop looking for connections. If you keep chasing prestige, you will only sink your son deeper. After she left, I opened the documents again. I knew I now held the one thing they feared most, the evidence. The meeting for the announcement of the results was held as expected. I entered the conference room with my documents, knowing one wrong step could distort the truth. There were more people this time. Mark sat at the end, slightly hunched, his hands trembling. Leo Tensei was a few seats away, looking calm but constantly checking his phone. The auditor began, showing the timeline. When they got to the warning email, they displayed two versions, the original and the edited one. The missing part was the very conclusion about high risk. Mark looked at the screen, and that's when he understood. He wasn't lacking advice, he was given a cleared path to sign. I stood up. I would like to submit copies of the system logs and the original email as evidence. Tensei immediately stood up. You have no right to interfere. I replied calmly. I am not interfering. I am ensuring the truth is not distorted. The fake email with my name directly affected my business, so I have the right to defend myself. An executive asked Tensei why the warning was edited. It might have been a sending error, he replied. The auditor responded immediately. According to system logs, the file was edited on an internal account before being forwarded. It was not an error. Tensei tried to change the subject, but the representative from the partner company suddenly spoke. What process allows for the selection of a supplier with a known record of fraud? The room fell silent, especially Isabella, who turned pale. And then the auditor displayed a conflict of interest diagram. Tensei had an indirect ownership stake in the new supplier through a relative. Tensei stood up. That's just speculation. Did you declare a conflict of interest? The executive asked. Tensei couldn't answer. Finally, Mark stood up. I take responsibility for being complacent, but I did not order the warning to be deleted, the email to be forged, or to profit from that supplier. The decision was announced. Due to signs of fraud, we recommend transferring the case to the legal department and temporarily suspending Mr. Leo Tensei. After the meeting, as I was leaving, Tensei suddenly made a noise, playing a recording of my voice. If you change suppliers, you will be responsible for the delay. A clipped recording to make it sound like I was threatening them. I stood my ground. I request the full recording be played, along with its metadata. They obliged. In the full recording, it was clear my statement was part of a professional warning, not a threat. In the final blow, the auditor showed that Mark's electronic signature was recorded at a time when he was out of the office for a meeting. It meant only one thing. Someone had used his account without permission. All eyes turned to Tensei. The meeting ended with the decision to investigate Tensei. 2 security guards approached him, a signal that the game was over. I walked out, not happy, not sad. I just understood. Data doesn't lie, and the truth, no matter how long, will always come out. After that meeting, it felt like I had emerged from a room with no air. The news spread like wildfire. Director, deceived by right-hand man. The word deceived was the most painful, because it turned a man who had arrogantly pushed for a divorce into a victim. And victims aren't pitied. They are laughed at. The next day, Isabella officially withdrew from all projects. Her email was professional, but the message was clear. I don't want to be involved. And the final blow, the partner corporation officially canceled their investment. The very connection for which Mark had traded our marriage left with an official letter. Eleanor crumbled. She kept repeating, "How did this happen?" asking the heir, but really asking herself. She thought that by changing a daughter-in-law, she could change her son's destiny. She didn't understand that destiny is not changed by scorn, but by right decisions and true accountability. 2 days later, Mark was transferred to a lower position. He wasn't fired, but he was left to live with the humiliation every day. That night, he came to my factory, thin, his clothes wrinkled, his old arrogance gone. "I was wrong," he said. "I thought I could climb fast using connections." I replied, "You climbed fast, but you forgot to look where you were stepping." He smiled bitterly. "I thought Mom had foresight. I thought Isabella was real. In the end, I was the blind one." It was a long time before he asked, "Have you thought about coming back?" I looked at him. "I don't go back to places where I've been replaced." He understood. He bowed his head. "I'm sorry for staying silent when Mom humiliated you." The apology was late, but it was the right one. As he was leaving, I saw Eleanor in the distance. She looked at me, no more contempt, only regret. I returned to my office. Their prestige had crumbled not because of me, but because of their own disregard for the truth. 2 days after that, I received an invitation from the corporation. They were offering me a strategic partnership. It was a step up for Pure Bloom Organics, but it also meant my connection to Mark's company would remain. I went to the meeting. The discussion was purely professional. They said they needed a partner with competence and a clean reputation, the very things I had worked for. It was a huge contract, but with great responsibility. At a subsequent meeting, Mark was there. When asked about the conflict of interest, he spoke up himself. "I will not participate in the approval of this contract. To avoid any issues, I recommend an independent group manage all evaluations." It was the first time I saw him put the company's welfare before his own. I signed the contract. That night, Eleanor came to the factory. "I was wrong about you," she said, almost a whisper. I replied, "Making a mistake isn't scary. What's scary is refusing to look back." The next day, the official news came out. Leo Tensei was charged with fraud. Mark was officially removed as director due to negligence, but he kept his job because he wasn't the mastermind. I stood in my factory, listening to the hum of the machines, and felt a sense of relief. Not because someone was prosecuted, but because the truth had been restored to its rightful place. A year passed. Pure Bloom Organics thrived. Mark started over from a lower position, quieter, simpler. Eleanor no longer mentioned class or connections. One day, Mark and I ran into each other in the corporation's lobby. "I lost the position," he said, "but I learned a lesson." I smiled. A position can be regained. Trust cannot. He understood. I was no longer angry, but there was no way back. Some things, once broken, will always have a crack, even if you glue them back together. Ambition is not wrong. What's wrong is when it devalues what truly matters. They thought false prestige could replace competence, but life isn't run by bravado. It's run by accountability, by integrity, by doing the right thing even when no one is watching. Sometimes, I remember the day I signed the divorce papers. They thought I had lost, but that was the day I began to win. Not because I defeated anyone, but because I won back the right to respect myself. And for me, that was enough.